Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar that we've got, Using Video to Enhance Your Online Teaching, the last webinar in the Lunch with Leo series, so everyone get pumped. I'm Haley Diaz, your host for today's event, and before the presentation, let's just knock out some logistics. So today's presentation is going to be recorded, and it will be distributed to all attendees within the next 24 hours. And then there are a couple Zoom and new features that we'll be using today, and we would love your participation in them. The Q&A feature in Zoom will actually be disabled for the presentation, and we'll be using the Q&A feature through Google. So look for the link in the chat for that. It'll be the same as if you were asking questions through Zoom, but now you'll be able to upvote questions, which is a really cool feature of Google. And just like in Zoom, we'll post the link in the chat, and for any questions that you have for our presenters, just put them in there and I'll make sure that they get them at the end of the presentation for the Q&A session. And if we don't get to your individual question, Austin and Dan will make sure to follow up with you after the presentation. And then the chat is just for general inquiries. Feel free to post anything in there you would like to share with the whole group. And finally, we'd love to get social with today's event. We'll be tweeting today using the hashtag that's on the bottom of your screen. That's hashtag Lunch with Leo. And to follow along and participate, just search for the hashtag in the search bar of Twitter and then click on the latest. We believe we learn best as a community, so we're always happy to hear your thoughts. And so with that all taken care of, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters, Austin Rutledge and Dan Thompson. First off, we have Austin, and with more than a decade of experience working in education, from teaching at every level and to working alongside faculty in every possible setting, Austin is passionate about working to improve student outcomes in every level of education. And while much of Austin's expertise lies in technology integration, his focus is always on finding the right pedagogical approach regardless of the role technology may play. And with Dan, he's always an educator. Dan transitioned from teaching high school to focusing on instructional design and educational technology in higher education for the last decade. Throughout his career, he has assisted faculty in course design and development, while also introducing new methods of utilizing educational technology in the curriculum to create a learner-centered environment. And with that, I'm happy to turn things over to Dan to get started.
Great, thanks Haley. We both appreciate the intro and getting us started there. I don't know if my video is coming up on screen right now because myself, it's kind of blanked out. So we're going to talk about engaging video, and here we have a technical issue to get us out of the gate. So we'll work on that as we get going. To jump right into the objectives for today, just three basic objectives that Austin and I are going to focus on. First, we want to describe why video content is important, and that's important. We always like to start with the why and explain that to let our attendees know why we're doing these different types of teaching methods. We also want to identify best practices for teaching online through video content. Obviously, that's something that is really central to what we're going to talk about, and we want to really make sure we give some clear tips and tricks during the next half an hour or so. And then finally, we're going to talk about tools and methods that you can develop and distribute. So we use those italics for a reason, that we want to make sure that we're just focusing, again, in the next half hour or so on getting information that is easily usable and actionable at your institution, hopefully even this fall. Okay, so first and foremost, why video? We talked about that at the very beginning, that or the first objective. Why are we using video? Well, first and foremost is for student engagement. And we always want to make sure we're engaging students in class. This is true whether we're talking about face-to-face or online learning. That students should be engaged not just with the course content, but when you can, also with you as a faculty member. And that's why we want to be able to increase that engagement. Students are also familiar with video. So it's I mean, not only during the current times where we're often reliant on Zoom meetings or FaceTime, even for social events, but students have long been familiar with consuming content in this way. So they're basics of, let's think about like lecture capture, for example. I'm sure many of those of you in healthcare education have some sort of lecture capture system at your school. And most faculty members that I've worked with throughout my career are often a little put off by lecture capture because if they lecture, students don't come to class. It's a way that attendance can be decreased. Well, I mean, students are choosing to use the video because they can consume that information the same way, and therefore they are familiar with learning the information that way. So it's not totally new to them. It's a way to build rapport. We're going to talk a lot about being pictured on camera today, which is why it's a bummer mine isn't working. But it's a way to build rapport in a one-on-one setting. I have a colleague that actually went from teaching face-to-face in classroom, classic for the most part lecture, and started doing all video lectures just with some few and far team-based learning methods, like 4 or 5 meetups throughout the whole semester. Everything else was video-based. And that faculty member reported to me, and even the students made this known as well, that they had a better rapport with the students engaging through the video because they taught in a way that was like really more one-on-one for the student. Which is a great tip, which Austin will get to in a bit, but they talked in a way that was very personal to the students as opposed to just lecturing to 100 students at a time. You can model behaviors and techniques, whether it's a clinical skill that you're trying to introduce to students before they have some time to get into a lab, or if you're an osteopathic school, for example, and you're doing manipulative OMM, easy for me to say there. If they're doing something where they're actually putting their hands on the patient, you can model that for them in the video, as opposed to just trying to explain it or have them read it in a book. Differentiated instruction, we hear this a lot in K-12, more differentiated instruction based on the levels of the students and their learning. Applied at this level, it's also more about how to engage your students in content through different modalities, whether you have the visual learners or the auditory learners, different, obviously different folks, and all of us here today learn in different ways. It's just a video is another way to help engage students. It allows for flexibility. This with teaching with video expands the different types of teaching methods you can use. Anything from traditional lecture, which I'm kind of doing right now, or anything through engaging students in small groups. Austin will talk about breakout rooms, Zoom, and different. We'll talk about again different tools, but it really kind of opens up your playbook a little bit to be more flexible, to make sure you're teaching the content with the appropriate teaching method. And finally, it's okay to have a little fun in class, whether you're in person or on a video. Obviously this is a very new semester for a lot of our students. So being able to reduce some stress and have a little fun and engage with them via the video is something that can go a long way in both making them a little bit more comfortable in their learning environment, but then also just making class more enjoyable, and students are engaged and a little bit edutained, if you will. They're more likely to consume that content.
Thanks for that, Dan. I'm going to talk a little bit about some best practices when it comes to video in the classroom. And so it looks like I got a rogue image showing up here. But essentially what I'm wanting to demonstrate for you here is that, you don't have to have all of the best equipment in the world. I have a little light. Lighting does actually play a pretty big role. And because I'm set up kind of with windows behind me, got a screen set up right now, but because I have windows behind me, sometimes without light on my face, it looks pretty dark. And so having just a little light up here can help quite a bit. Think about your microphones as well, whether you're using just like a simple headset. It is usually best practice to have your audio source and your microphone source be separate. It helps to reduce echoes. Oftentimes you can introduce an echo into a conversation otherwise. As Dan was saying, we do really encourage you to turn on your camera and try to engage with the students or the learners, whoever it is that you're talking to. And the other thing, this is a great tip I received from a colleague and Dan as well, at a former colleague of mine, David Jurgens. And he always talked about whenever you're recording your audio or your video, if you're on camera, it's always best to think about that one person you want to talk to. And so when you're looking into the camera, you're thinking about, I'm talking to just, that one person out there, and try to really engage with that individual. And even though they're many people watching, that helps to really engage all of them. And so that's I think a really helpful tip. And then the last thing on here, I thought, which could be especially applicable, and it's kind of hidden by this image, apologize for that, is that the idea of using video for commentary. So like, especially in a health sciences setting, thinking about how you might, maybe video some type of demonstration or clinical skill like Dan was talking about. I don't know if anybody ever watches, like when you watch the Blu-ray or DVD version of a movie, you can turn on like the director's commentary and hear about like all the things they talked about while the movie was being made. Well, you kind of think about it that same way too. You could, video yourself demonstrating a skill in, a clinical skills course for med ed, but then you can come back, narrate it, commentate, and you kind of explain to the students what's going on as they're watching the video. So some helpful tips there. Some other ideas using on-screen text. So if you need to highlight something, having, a lot of this can be done in, some very simple editing programs, but having, like an arrow point to something or, important things like that, screen text popping up at a certain point in the video, that can be helpful too. Chunking your content, I think is, it's a helpful idea to kind of not necessarily make everything so much shorter, but make sure that, they're focusing on a single concept or a single learning objective at a time, and then maybe transition to another video for a separate learning objective. So chunking your content, I think, is a good idea. Be conversational. That's something that, you don't want to give off too much of a formal vibe. In some cases that's okay. But I would say for the most part, when you're working with your students, try to have as much of that conversational tone as you can, like Dan was saying, to help build rapport with those students. And then also, I would encourage you to think too about, are you reusing, if you did a lecture capture, 3 years ago, and they recorded your lecture in front of 100 students in a lecture hall, I would encourage you not to just take that video and drop it into, an online system. So, hey, go watch this video. And now I'm using video for my teaching. Not that you might want to reuse certain parts of that lecture, but students are going to know that, hey, this was for those students at that time. This wasn't made for me. And so think about how you can kind of customize the content for the students that you're working with at that time. And then this last tip came from one of the references from Vanderbilt University. I thought this was a really helpful tip. Thinking about what you're doing in terms of the teaching. Are you telling a story or narrating, talking about a case, working with a patient, or are you talking about a specific process that happens in some type of body system? And think about how you can use video to match those modalities. So if you're telling a story, maybe you want to turn off the slides and really just focus on talking to your students. And if you are demonstrating a process and, how cells change over time or, something like that, then maybe you turn off your video so students can really focus in on the process that's going on. So just keep that in mind as you're teaching your students and think about how you're teaching that specific concept in that moment. And so now we're going to try something a little bit different. When it comes to teaching methods, one of the things I really like is the idea of using recorded video, so pre-recorded content, even in a live online setting. And so I'm actually going to play a video for you guys via Zoom. You might see a little bit of choppiness. We saw some in our testing, but the audio and everything hopefully will come through pretty clear. And what I want you to recognize while we're doing this, Dan and I, we're really going to be tuned in to the Q&A during this time. Because I don't want to just play the video and then say, okay, my job's done. I want to hit play. And then that gives me an opportunity as the facilitator to engage with what's going on at that same time. And so, and if needed, I can always hit pause and address any questions that might come up. So I'm going to switch over to that video real quick and I'll hit play. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of the teaching methods and strategies that you can use for video in a live online classroom. And the first one is Jigsaw. And so if you're using a video conferencing system that has breakout rooms, or even if you're not, you can create multiple meetings in a video conferencing tool to allow students to get into different groups and become experts in one specific topic. I know Dan talked a lot about this a couple of weeks ago with his webinar on small groups and how you can use small groups in an online classroom. And so I would just encourage you to learn more about Jigsaw and think about getting students really active in their learning and making them accountable for one specific concept or part of a problem or a case. This is also a great way to think about interprofessional education and having students from different areas represented within different groups or breaking out into groups with mixed students in them as well. And so in online classrooms, you can use breakout rooms to do a lot of this, but you can also send students to different meetings if you need to, because most meetings are accessed through a URL. You can post all that information in your learning management system, and it makes the logistics a lot simpler. Another great strategy for teaching in the online environment is team-based learning, and so you're going to be using video conferencing for a lot of this. And so again, same concept. Students are going to be in teams, and they might be sharing their screens as they work to answer GRATs together. Or TRATs, those readiness assurance tests. Those are great tools to use to help students get immediate feedback. Also, don't neglect the idea of having students present in a live setting. It's in some ways a lot simpler. Students don't have to get up and walk to a podium or plug in thumb drives or anything like that. They just click share screen. They have their presentation up and ready to go. And so allowing students the ability to share what they know, what they've learned, is a great way to use video in the online classroom. Also, don't forget when you're teaching and utilizing these live environments to have some kind of ability for students to have a side conversation. And by that, I mean not off topic, I mean give them a place that they can ask questions, that they can record their thoughts related to the content that's being discussed. And so this is helpful because sometimes it eliminates the distraction and the interruption of the back and forth with the instructor, and it allows a place to collect all of those questions and address them as needed. And so we're actually demoing this Google Slides Q&A today, so you can kind of see how that one works. But there's a lot of other options out there. And then Padlet's a great tool for a back channel. And I love the idea of being social. We're big fans of Twitter at Da Vinci Education, and so it's a great place as well to extend that learning beyond the classroom. Also, don't neglect the idea of being able to use recorded video in a live online setting. So I'm recording this video in advance, and we're going to play it during the webinar. Excuse me. And so this is a great way that we want to actually show you that hitting play on a recorded video doesn't just mean that we're sitting back and twiddling our thumbs. It allows us as the instructors to be more active and engaged in what's going on with the Q&A or those back channels or side conversations, and we can address those questions as needed, and even hit pause on the video if we need to address an important topic that's been brought up by a question that someone's asked. So recorded videos is a helpful tool as well. Some of the tools, just real quick, the breakout groups, the breakout rooms that I mentioned earlier are really helpful. One of the cool things in Leo is you can actually create those small groups of students, those teams ahead of time, and then you can export those from Leo because you use them in Leo for other things, whether that's in a GRAT or TRAT exam or a linked event, whatever that might be. But you can take those small groups and import those from that CSV file into Zoom or maybe some other video conferencing tools and pre-assign those breakout rooms with the students. Don't forget some of the innate features that are embedded in some of these video conferencing tools, like the whiteboards or polling features. One thing to keep in mind with polling is that even your audience response system that you've utilized in the classroom, it might still work in a live online setting. If it's cloud-based, then students probably don't have to be in one place. And a lot of those tools even will embed into your learning management system. So think about the options for that as you're exploring the use of audience response in a live online setting. And then there's also some lecture capture systems that allow you to broadcast live, so keep that in mind as well. I would test those out. Sometimes there can be a little lag, but some really cool options there. And then there are a lot of free tools out there that allow you to do some neat stuff too. Like with Office 365, you can broadcast a presentation live online, and you can even embed it, like we talk about in your learning management system. And we're big fans of bringing everything back to the learning management system to give your students kind of that central. Okay, so I wanted to just go ahead and pause right there while this was still on the screen. And because this is one of the things I thought was really neat, the ability to embed live presentations. And so I was testing this the other day with PowerPoint Live. So if you have access to Office 365, you can actually embed that right into your learning management system, and they can see that live presentation happening. So that's a great way, whether you're using Zoom or even, you know, some other, I think this was YouTube Live that we used in this demonstration, but whatever that might be, lots of cool things that you can do there. So I'm going to go back to our presentation real quick, and we'll move ahead. But I did just to kind of debrief that kind of concept about, you know, video, you know, playing pre-recorded video in a live setting. I thought that was great. You know, being able to entertain and think about the questions that are coming in. So I saw 2 questions about, you know, if you're not an experienced video editor, how possible is this for novices to do? If you have access to a smartphone, or even just using the web camera on your laptop or your desktop computer, if you have access to those types of cameras, you can do quite a bit. The most important thing is to make sure that people can see you on the camera so that you have some good lighting. If you have, you know, good windows that you can sit in front of, that's certainly helpful. But, you know, I think being able to do that, you know, just as a key takeaway, I probably recorded that video about 5 or 6 times because I was never really happy with the way it came out. And that's another advantage of using pre-recorded video, is that you can make sure that you're communicating really what you want to communicate. And you don't have to be as, you know, flustered in a live setting if something doesn't go right, for example. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and he's going to talk more about using video in an asynchronous method. So in the situation that you aren't doing everything live.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. And as you can see, still video issues here in Durham. But jumping into asynchronous, and I'm actually going to build a little bit on what Austin was saying there too. You know, he talked about like chunking things into smaller smaller pieces or smaller modules. And you probably hear Dexter the cat in the background as well. It's great timing by him. So it's not always about shorter times. You know, Austin was talking about chunking content into based on the content itself, and not trying to cover multiple areas of content in one larger video, but breaking them into smaller videos. And so, you know, I did a bunch of research on this, and I was expecting to see that it would say do shorter videos, do shorter content, because that's what students want to consume. You know, we live in this, you know, era of, you know, the social media era of students wanting, you know, small bits of content. And what I found was actually there's no research that strongly was supporting that. And so it's much more about engagement as opposed to specifically to attention span. So, you know, the examples I have here are, you know, the DVR. You know, I'm sure all of us have DVR to show at some point in our life. We're talking about a 30-minute show. We're watching what is like 22 minutes of content or so, and 8 minutes of commercials. And I'm going to guess the vast majority of people on today, or just vast majority of human beings in general, fast forward through the commercials, because that's not the content that we're engaged in. We are watching the show we want to watch. So even though there's an example of longer content getting us to stay there and watch it while we're skipping the shorter bursts of commercials, because again, we're engaged with that. We usually have something invested in that show. And then, you know, next is this idea of, if you've ever seen this video phenomena, is of exploding watermelons. There was a group, this is on Facebook Live back in 2016, and they were trying to see how many rubber bands you'd have to put around a watermelon to explode it. And they did this for 45 minutes. It did nothing more than put rubber band after rubber band around a watermelon. It doesn't seem, you know, it's a long time, 45 minutes. It doesn't seem like the most exciting video, but this goes back to when Austin was saying storytelling. They're kind of telling a story, you know,
and building some intrigue along the way. So if you do, engage in storytelling with your students, make sure that you are building that intrigue along the way to see what's going to happen next. Long story short, the watermelon didn't make it. And make content meaningful. I missed a word there, meaningful to students, and that's how we really get students to engage. So if we're talking about healthcare education students, adding what the ramification is for their professional career is something that's going to be much more important to them as learners than just saying, hey, you need to memorize this. So we often talk about being transparent and clearly explaining things to students, and that's part of it. We also, another big part of asynchronous teaching is having formative feedback and having the opportunity for that. Something easy, discussion boards. Obviously in Leo we have discussion boards so that you can keep the ongoing conversation even outside of class. This is valuable whether it's an ongoing, a module for students, or if it's, they're doing a flipped classroom and have to do some work ahead of time, want to discuss. There are, as Austin talked about lecture capture a little bit, there are some lecture capture systems that let you put questions in the recorded videos. That's a great way to break up that content, like Austin was talking about before, keep students engaged, keep it meaningful. And that way they're just more engaged with the actual content in each little chunk of content. Students can create videos. It's a great way, you don't always have to do live student presentations in class. You can do recorded presentations in class. And then from there, you can, have them peer reviewed. You can review them and then share the top one for other students to study from. There's different ways to go about that as well. And finally, prompted pauses. Austin and I were talking about this just yesterday, where if you don't have the other tech, you don't have the ability to create questions in your videos, or students aren't engaged in discussion boards, you can at least pause and prompt students to pause in the video and say, take a minute to think on that, to go research that. You can, and again, be transparent with them. They're going to get out of that what they put into it. So emphasize the fact that, yes, I'm asking you to do some of these things, and I know you can skip past it. Anyone can just keep on going and not pause it. But for the rest of the video to really have some meaning to you, you really should take some time to pause. And that will be a prompt that will make it a little bit more real to them. We can hop to the next slide. There we go, thank you. And then last thing, kind of take it home on some of the tools. We always want to provide opportunities to extend learning. So, that's really key to have some critical thinking exercises as well. You don't always want outside of class time just to be, read this article, watch this video, and just be basic content consumption. You do want students to think critically. That can be something as simple as students creating their own learning objectives. I've done this with med students in the past, where at the end of a session we've had them, based on the content presented, have them think about, reflect on what else they would like to learn pertaining to that lesson that day, and they write a couple learning objectives for themselves to then go out and research. And there's a number of ways if you want to make that a graded or not graded assignment. Peer review is great. I mentioned the videos. Students can peer review each other's videos or written work outside of class as well. The entry ticket or pre-class quiz, that's always a great way to, before you have a video session, along with like your flipped classroom, maybe they're watching a video ahead of time or reading something before you meet real time. Let's say it's like a Zoom breakout room session you're doing with students. The entry ticket will make sure that just kind of keeps them honest that they're getting their work done in advance. And then shout out to another colleague, Justin Zumwalt wrote a great article, which I think is going to find its way in the chat if it's not already there, on topic summary condensing. And that's just a great way for students to think critically, especially outside of the class, about the content, and to be able to take a large amount of content, let's say it's written content, and then pare it down into a paragraph, and then down into a sentence, and then maybe down into a phrase, to see if they can, what terms they can use to really capture the most important pieces of certain content. The article explains it obviously much more in depth since we're a little short on time. Finally, some tools that are helpful. A MedEd LMS like Leo, one thing that Austin mentioned, having all content stream through one single source of truth for students is really important. So they're not going, especially for their cognitive load, we don't want them going all, to different, several different types of ed tech products. That can be a strain on them, especially with them not in the classroom. So think about focusing and flowing it through your LMS. lecture capture, we've talked about that enough. I'll kind of breeze past that. And then finally, if you do a SCORM file that can be embedded in Leo, a SCORM file is just an interactive file for students where you can actually add video or audio. There's different ways you can make the SCORM file more interactive for students, as it's really just like a self-paced learning module. Think of it that way, where students control the pace at which they move through the module. You have written content and of course add some video. And finally, having all of these tools embeddable to engage in your LMS is really key, like I mentioned before. Make it an easy way for students to engage with the video in an asynchronous format so that they're not scrambling on what they need to learn in preparation for their class time. I think with that, we are done right around on time. We do appreciate everyone being here. We will hang around for a couple more minutes for questions if folks do have questions. I know Austin threw it in the chat for the link to the Google Slides to be able to drop some questions in there. If you see a question that is that you're interested in, just go ahead and do the little upvote. Give us a little thumbs up and we'll make sure we get to that one. So I'm going to turn it over to Haley now to see if we do have any questions to answer.
Yeah, I think we actually do. Just want to give a big thanks to Austin and Dan again for such an engaging and really informative presentation. Great job, y'all. So yeah, we do have a couple questions to roll in. One of the attendees asked, do you have any recommendations for encouraging active participation either during or after a video conferencing or recording?
What do you think, Dan? For that one, for me, I think that when it comes to encouraging active participation, it kind of goes along. I think there's another question in there about quiz questions. So with the recording, there's a lot of different tools. I know Dan mentioned some lecture capture systems allow you to actually put quiz questions right in the middle of those videos. And so basically what happens is a video gets to a certain point and it stops. The student cannot advance past that point. And so, if they're watching this recording, they have to engage that question, submit their answer before they can go on and see the rest of the content. So I guess maybe prevent some of that, students just hitting play and letting it be background noise or not, staying as focused as they know they should be. If having those questions in there kind of keeps them honest for really paying attention, I guess.
Yeah, Austin, I love that. And even a setup prior to that, especially if you don't want to get into some scoring with them, is having the teaching method that you're using that day aligned with your learning objectives, and just being clear to students that emphasizing the fact that the content that they're learning is an important part of that course and what you're going to build upon. You can maybe even drop the line like, hey, this might end up on the test. And I bet you having just that little preface there is a way to create the foundation for it. And then of course, like Austin was saying, then when they're into the actual session, having some interaction is always a big help.
Definitely. Thanks, y'all, for that. So I think just because we're, at time, I think we're going to stop the question and answer session. And, if you have any questions, feel free to email us later, or if we didn't answer them, we'll make sure to reach out to you individually. So with that just ends our Lunch with Leo webinar series today and ever. So we really appreciate y'all's attendance and engagement. We know we've had a lot of fun sharing all this good info with y'all. We hope it's been helpful and thought-provoking for you guys. And we'll make sure to share the recording with y'all in an email later up today and follow up with anyone if you have any questions individually. And just one more thing before we all head out. For our client partners, we have another DaVinci office hours tomorrow afternoon at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And the topic for tomorrow's office hours is embedding video and LTI options. So just check your email for the Zoom link, and that'll be sent out today. So just thanks again, everyone, for your participation and attendance, not only today, but in all of the other Lunch with Leo webinar series. We really appreciate it and hope to see you around. Have a great Thursday, everyone.